Point or anything like that, right?
No, no, no,
Okay,
no, no.
perfect, perfect. All right. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is Wednesday. Today is Comprehensivist Wednesday. This is for polymaths and transdisciplinary people, and for human beings. So that's what we're trying to do here. And I'm delighted to have my friend Joe talk about one of his favorite books, Range. So Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Shrikant, and happy.
Sorry, let me interrupt for a second. Let me tell you,
Sure.
let me tell everybody about the format. So what we're going to do is that Joe is going to make a presentation about the book. Okay. Then we're going to have some short Q&A. But today what we want to do is that this book really puts on the table the idea of a generalist and the power of generalist. And this is something that this group is all about. So this is really core subject that we focus on. So what we're going to do is that we're going to do breakout rooms. After that, 20 minutes breakout rooms. Then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about our takeaways from the breakout rooms, but not just passively. What just takeaways and what are the big questions you have. And what I will do is that I'll keep summarizing everything. And once we have an idea of all our thoughts together, we will either do kind of further Q&A, further discussion on this, and then at the end of it we will identify another like 2 or 3 questions which survive and which remain like the key questions that are on everybody's mind, and we're going to do another round of breakout rooms after that. So this is all about discussion, so keep track. I have I recommend that you use notebook or something to keep track of all the ideas that you have, and please talk about them. So there is going to be plenty of opportunity for you to talk. All right. So with that, over to you, Joe. Sorry about the interruption.
Oh, no, no, no. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining me here. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Not feeling 100% this evening, but we'll try and get the conversation off the ground. And as Shrikant has already said, this is really core to the Comprehensivist Wednesdays topic. So the book Range is about the development of human potential. And what I want to do is I want to cover 3 specific areas coming away from the book, even though the book covers a multitude of topics when it talks about unlocking human potential. But the 3 that I want to talk about is why we overvalue specialization, the importance of match quality as a predictor of success, and lateral thinking with withered technology. Now, the book breaks down the development of human potential into 2 different areas, into a generalist and a specialist. And a generalist is someone who dabbles in a number of areas and before settling on what they actually want to choose to do. Now, generalists in this time are able to obtain the way of thinking conceptually because they're getting experience across a wide range of domains. This is, obviously something that is advantageous for when you're trying to look into if you're making career changes, and we'll go into different things along those lines down the line in a little bit here. Specialists are a little bit different in the sense that they pursue very specialized goals with the idea of becoming very efficient. Now, the book is really built around challenging the 10,000 hour hypothesis, which is where the idea of becoming great of anything at 10 hours of focused practice. So if you get started as early as possible, that you'll become great at something. And the specialist's viewpoint of the world is also that the more competitive that we live in a much more competitive world. So if you pick something to specialize early on, that you can focus on it and you'll be more likely as a predictor for success. Now, the example that he uses and he was a writer for Sports Illustrated, and the way he had come around this book is he had actually debated Malcolm Gladwell at MIT at an MIT sports conference, and he called it the Tiger and Roger problem, and essentially that Tiger Woods early on in his career at 2 years old had famously been on national TV and gained recognition, and 20 years later was the best golfer in the world. Where the other individual is Roger Federer, is somebody who played a variety of sports and before becoming the best tennis player in the world. Now, the reason why we are all, it's a very well documented story with Tiger Woods and not necessarily Roger Federer, is that we tend to think of becoming successful as a linear process. And we like to identify with somebody that is pick something that they want to do, practices it for 10,000 hours, and becomes very good and becomes successful in their goals. Where, you know, it is a nice narrative because that's what but he applies. So what he does is he takes these two cases and finds out that if you really want to be successful, Roger Federer's path is a much more likelihood as a way of achieving success, playing a variety of sports and then choosing something to specialize. And they found out that Tiger Woods, his story was more or less the exception, not the rule. Now, what he does is he then takes this hypothesis and applies it across other industries and says, you know, if you are specializing at an early age, that yes, early on, you have a competitive advantage, but you plateau, whereas generalists continue to be successful as they find out their what they want to do, as they pick what to specialize in. So there's something called match quality that's with economists, is where they're basically and you know, looking at how you basically how you become successful is basically by trying new activities, building new networks, finding as many new role models, and trying as many different things. But you have to be comfortable with failure in this process. But as you have this form, you start to discover about yourself what you want to do, and what you want to, and how to become successful. And one example that I want to use with this is that there's something called lateral thinking with withered technology, is the concept that's introduced later in the book. And there is an engineer who is a low-level engineer who liked to dabble in a lot of different things, but ultimately, when he he was didn't score well in his exams and everything, and came in very low on it, and just worked as maintenance. But he was able to use concepts to build new tools, and basically that company that he was able to build up was Nintendo. And he built it up by just using concepts from things in his experiences from a broad range of topics. And so he took things specifically from the calculator industry, from the credit card industry, and he was able to extract all this information and build tools. And this is something that I find to be the most interesting part of the book. You had somebody that was able to think deeply about something, or think broadly about something, as opposed to thinking deeply about something. And when you're talking about innovation, this is something that, to me, it's important because I think that it shows that it's accessible to everybody, that there was so much good technology around that if you start to think broadly about a topic, then you're able to actually put something together and based off of your experiences, that you're able to innovate. When we think of innovation, we kind of think of the same thing with the Tiger Woods story, in the sense that you have people like, who do you think of when you think of great innovators? You think of Bill Gates, you think of Mark Zuckerberg, you think of Elon Musk, who are all great innovators, but they're child prodigies, or they've achieved a lot early on. We don't necessarily hear about the stories where people that are people that like the guy, his name's Gunpei Yoko, who worked at Nintendo, that was able to bring all these various concepts in to build one of the more successful companies in the world with a market cap of around $60 billion. So this idea that you can start to get as many experiences as possible and build industries based off of this, I think is one of the more powerful concepts in the book. And from there, I'll just leave it open to questions for now.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So folks, let's do, we have 4 rules for Q&A. Number 1, type exclamation mark in the chat. You can both, at this point, you can both make a comment or make a question, ask a question. Number 2, keep on topic. We're talking about, the power of generalist, generalist versus specialist. What is the difference in approach? Number 3, be brief. There's a lot of people who have a lot of interesting things to say. So keep your piece short so you can hear other people. And number 4, feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. All right. So comments, questions. Okay, so I'm going to get it started. So Joe, I mean, one of the things whenever I think about this issue is the question of business and personal. I mean, we live in a time where we have considerable amount of leisure. So in addition to your work, you have plenty of time to do other things. So if you want to be a generalist, it's a very easy way of investing your free time into anything else that you want until you build up something. So I don't think of the concept of generalist as purely tied to a profession. I think it's a wider concept that applies to the range of what you do. What do you think about
I
this
absolutely,
business and personal?
and this is actually one of the examples that Gunpei Yoko, the person with Nintendo, he had. He was in a maintenance position, and he had some excess time to start to come up with new toys that essentially allowed the company to pay all its debt back and uh, and start to become the company that it was. But he had time, and he did things like ballroom dancing. He worked with cars. He worked with all these different things, but he used everything that was there was already accessible to him. And that was the interesting part. Once he had the time to really focus and see how all these parts work together, he pulled things from various industries in order to make it work. And so I think that that's a very important part of this entire process.
Excellent. So it's going to be Jean, Barry, Vanessa, and Sally. Jean, go ahead.
Yes, quite interesting. So I'm actually listening to the book Essentialist right now, which is quite inspiring. And the idea is like, we have to focus on few things, like say no to a lot of things. Actually, it's quite different from my approach before. And I was thinking maybe it's good for me. But so I was wondering, like it's kind of a conflict between the exploring and dive deep. So when you should, what they said is like, before you become essential, you have to explore a little bit. You have to explore first, then you choose something, then you say no to everything else. So it's a little bit like specialist in some way. So I was wondering, when you stop exploring, when you should be more essentialist, or when you should be all open to new experience. I think there's kind of like hard to define. I'm trying to figure out myself, actually. What do you think?
Well, no, that's actually one of the breakout questions that I really wanted to pose to everyone, is that how do you really measure your progress and that you're not drifting? Because at some point you do have to pick something to specialize in. And that's one way the generalist is a little bit different. Like when we tend to define generalist, we just look at somebody that does, jack of all trades, master of none. What the author is saying in this book is that at some point, the generalist is just sampling. It's going through a very large sampling period where you eventually choose something that you that you're good at and that you like. So it's a very it's hard to draw that line. But the thing that I like the most about the book is that he really hammers home the fact that you're really never far behind. Don't really compare yourself to other people, and to really look, to look at yourself, what you were yesterday, and to essentially, the best way to really have success is to really focus on yourself, not other people. But the idea of drifting is something that I'm hoping we can have a discussion about, because I really don't know what the formula would be to distinguish between somebody that's drifting and somebody that's just a generalist. And that's a danger. That is a danger when you start to generalize in too many different things and that you never choose. At the same time, at what age, there really is no age limit on this either. So that's the question I'm hoping we can all explore together.
So Joe, my thought is the way I experience it is that it is kind of, I go out and come back in. So it's like explore. There is an explore mode and there is an exploit mode, and you have to continuously keep going like that,
Right.
relentlessly in every dimension. So what you're doing is that it's like, macro, what Bucky calls macro comprehensive
Right.
and micro incisive, and you need both of those things. If you just went like this, it's going to be dissipating all your energy, unless you can bring it back onto something that you can actually transform. Then you're not doing that much. So you have to have, kind of go in that fashion. So I think, I operate visually, so that's the best way I can describe it. Next up is going to be Barry, Vanessa, Sally, Sanjay, and Dustin. Barry, go ahead.
Well, did the book discuss a little bit about the value of being a generalist, not so much to make more money or to be successful in the business, but to be a better person, because I argue that we're naturally generalists. That is, our culture makes us specialist, and it's a aberration. It's pathological. And I think our natural tendency is to be generalists, because our bodies and our brains are generalists. We don't have one sense. We have five senses. Sometimes we have more than that. And so I am firmly convinced that people that are specialists are that they are the aberration, not the generalist. And so what I'm asking is, the book get into about making yourself into a better person. That does not necessarily mean you make more money.
No.
It makes you a happier and more stable and grounded person. That to me is more important than making a lot of money, because we can see people that pursue power and money, and they are horrible people. They're often narcissists.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, look at Steve Jobs. He was very successful, but he was a horrible person.
Thanks, Barry. Great observation. Go ahead, Joe.
So, I mean, it does talk about the idea of success, but when you're talking about the unleashing human potential, I think, he really does cover it across the whole, spectrum of things. It's not, he doesn't really cover the moral aspect of becoming a generalist. I agree with you 100%, and he does cover the idea of how society is forcing us to become specialists, and so are encouraging us. They're not forcing us to become a specialist. That aspect of it, if you look in the industrial age, yes, the specialist has become seen as a path to success. And what he's trying to do is counter that entire hypothesis and say, no, the real way to success is it's your own personal journey, and it's getting as many experiences as possible so that you can then extract concepts and apply them to where you find to be most fit. It doesn't get into the idea that money, he doesn't get into the idea that whether money is good or bad. But this is the best way to find your own personal success in your own journey. And that's perhaps the most important part of the book, or important thing to take away from the book in becoming a generalist. And I do agree with you that we do tend to overvalue specialization in today's world. I think and I think the reason we overvalue his specialization is because of the hypothesis that he puts forth is that primarily it's a very neat narrative. It's nice to think that if you work hard and you do something for 10,000 hours, that you're going to be successful, and that it's just a matter of grit, where that simply doesn't hold water. And he proves that throughout the book.
Thank you, Barry. That was an excellent observation. That at a personal level, I completely agree with you that at a personal level, I don't see why a person shouldn't be that, because that's like simply exercising all our faculties.
Yes.
And kind of being open to the world and open to life. The problem of, okay, how do you convert part of that into living, into money is a separate problem. Absolutely important problem, but a separate problem. But at a personal level, I think there is no doubt in my mind that, it's like you are losing a lot if you say, I'm going to look at only this and nothing else. The world is too rich. Next up is Vanessa, Sally, Sanjay, Dustin, Julie, and Kevin. Vanessa, what's your question?
Okay, I have a question and a comment. Does it also relate on the individual? Like, let's say if you're very analytical, does it help? Let's say if you maybe go to the specialist first. And the other thing, just a comment about the body in general, how if you do exercise, it's better to cross train to like mess with your metabolism versus you get so focused and the metabolism kind of figures out what you're doing. Because sometimes you're better if you wing it, and you may be more creative if your face, you dabble here and there versus someone that has to follow the recipe to the T. Don't you dare try adding an extra spice or something, because you're going to mess it all up versus, with experience, realize, oh, this could use a little bit of this to jazz it up. And I think more people like it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vanessa. Go ahead.
So I think that, you're asking basically, is there a point where there's someone that's analytical? He's not saying that there's no room for a specialist. And that's what I really like about this book. And in the example of Gunpo Yoko was another that I used a little bit earlier, is that he was actually saying, yes, I need to know the concepts, but I need to know what a semiconductor can do, but I don't need to know its inner workings. So you do need people that are analytical and specialists at a certain point. So as far as personality is concerned, there are personality exams that he covers in the book, but he doesn't say that they can't become generalists. But the other part to your question, part of your question is, there's still a role for specialists in this book. He's just saying that we're always told the specialist is the best way for human development, when a generalist is actually an optimal way to approach learning and your career.
Sally, you're next.
Okay, I have a couple of comments. I don't know if the author touched upon it in the book, but the findings remind me of some studies I've heard about teams in the workplace, and that teams who are more diverse as far as gender, race, occupation, class, all these different aspects of life, teams that are more diverse come up with better solutions for integral approaches. So I feel like they're, what the generalist, I feel like those are somewhat similar, although now that I think more about it, I'm not sure, but diverse, teams could make up like a body, and then that body is better when it has more information. Secondly, there's this physicist who speaks on time, or he's a specialist in time, but he's also a generalist. There's an interview with him in Apartmento magazine, and he's this pretty famous Italian physicist, Carlo Rovelli, and he's known for being a generalist. And then lastly, just to comment on what Vanessa said about the body, when I was young, I took ballet. I wasn't a ballerina. I just took ballet lessons. And then I went to this other school for a moment, and I told them I ran track, and they're like, oh no, you can't run track. You're a ballerina. You know, that different muscles, it's just not going to work. You can't run track anymore. So I thought that was kind of funny. I definitely didn't give up track. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sally. Great observations. Next up is Sanjay.
Yes, hi. So fantastic topic, Joe. This is very interesting. So I have, so I've worked in the life sciences for most of my career, and I've actually thought about this topic for years and tried to understand how, what makes us capable and creative and inventive. And most of the people that I work with are, many of the people are highly educated and specialized. So what I've seen is that the people who are most effective, most capable, tend to be both generalists and specialists. They have both aspects. So people who are only a generalist or who are only a specialist, they can succeed, but the level that they achieve, from what I've seen, the level that they achieve can be surpassed if they gain that other side of the coin, so to speak. For example, and this is what, I think that when Bucky described the term that Shrikant used, macro-comprehensivist and micro-incisive, I think that's what he meant, is that the comprehensivist is the generalist where you're expanding out. And I agree that this is an iterative process when we're learning, that you learn something, you expand your knowledge, you look across all, not just fields, but all areas of knowledge outside of your field included. And you coalesce, you consolidate that information, and then you, after you consolidate, then you start exploring in different areas. So it's both the expansive and, the broad and the deep. I think both of those are just as important. And I don't think that it's necessarily that this, being one or the other causes people to be, a horrible person. I think Barry, he used, he was giving examples of Steve Jobs and other people, but I don't think that this necessarily makes somebody a bad person or a good person, or that it necessarily makes them enjoy their career or their work or not. I think that's totally unrelated. I think that, many of the people that I work with, I especially enjoy, I always had found my career very, very interesting, but I don't think it's related to necessarily this aspect. I think that's more our psychology that makes us enjoy things, and whether we're good or bad. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Go ahead, Joe.
No, yeah, I mean, actually, and thank you for saying that, Sanjay, because actually there's a couple of things that even I've known you even before the book had come out, and we had a conversation, and you talked about how a generalist has to specialize at a certain point, and that even, to some degree, you have to focus in. And that's kind of the same definition that the author does use. As far as it, relating to comprehensivism, I agree with you that, you can be both, you have people that are both broad and deep. It's not necessarily either or. It's just whatever. Again, he's challenging the narrative that you have to specialize, which seems to be the overwhelming narrative to become successful, because things are more competitive, that we need to specialize in order to even be successful. So it's not, and there's another part to it. I don't think it necessarily does have a link to the type of person you are, but I will say this: the more experiences that you have, the greater empathy that you'll have for others. And so I think that that's it's unrelated, but I do think that there is the idea that you start to step out of yourself and in your specialized world, and this is where teams in the workplace become able to work together better, when they start to have multidisciplinary teams, as opposed to having just analytical people, or just scientists. And I know that you are a generalist yourself, to with even though you do specialize in the life sciences. So I mean, I'm sure you have experience in this area, with making those teams work together. So I think that there really is there is an idea that you can develop, the more you get outside yourself, that you can develop empathy. But you're right. I think that you could still be a good person and be a specialist.
So I want to follow up on one observation of Sanjay. So the question of, I think I agree with Sanjay that you have to have both. You have to be able to go broad and you have to be able to go deep. And the question is, how do you do that? Okay. And I think there is a magic concept that allows you to do that. And that is a concept of general principles that Buckminster Fuller talks about. So what you're doing is that when you are actually going across a field, and this is, I learned it first from Charlie Munger and many other people. But the idea is that you are not trying to just study concretes. It's not a field to you. What you're trying to do when you're seeing something new is that you're trying to extract general principles. General principles are applicable anywhere. So it is the way in which Charlie Munger puts it, is that he's adding a tool to his toolkit that can be brought to bear on anything. So if you go broad and walk away from this new area with a general principle that means applicable anywhere, then your effectiveness of operating in any field goes up. So I think general principle is the middle term of how do you go broad and deep at the same time. Next up is going to be Dustin, Julie, Kevin, and Donna. Dustin.
Yeah, so I was going to respond to Joseph and Shrikant, actually kind of going along with what I'm going to say here, is that when you're talking about jack of all trades, master of none, we all heard that saying before, but oftentimes it's actually not fully spoken. It's jack of all trades, master of none, but also sometimes better than a master of one. And I think you might mention that in the book. It's funny, I haven't actually read the book yet, but I've listened to like a dozen podcasts by him about it. But it's interesting how whenever he's talking about being a generalist, it's more about how you go about doing it. And something you mentioned earlier too is about being too divergent and not building it up. So the jack of all trades mentality, where you're just a novice in everything. I do think that when you're becoming a specialist in many areas, like a polymath, that you can do it multiple pillars at once, not just one thing. Like he talks about a funnel where you're dabbling like a jack of all trades, funneling like Roger Federer did, and then becoming more of a generalist as you get older. But I do think you can do it as multiple pillars at the same time. It's just like Shrikant is saying, having more along the lines of principles and mental models too, to kind of get that way going. So I just thought I'd get your thoughts on that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Dustin. Joe, any thoughts?
No, I thought he actually just
Excellent.
spoke beautifully. I mean, I thought it was excellent. So
Excellent. Thank you, Dustin. Next up is Julie, Kevin, Donna, and Mike. Julie.
I had a question about Wednesday nights for those of us that are new, maybe specifically define what micro-incisive means. And I also had a question about, have they done any studies about curiosity? Because you can go curiosity wide and you can also go deeper into what your specific field is. Do they have any studies on whether that trait is more one or the other? Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer the first one and then hand it over to Joe for the second. So the first one, micro-incisive, that term of Buckminster Fuller, it's saying that it's a pair. So he's saying macro comprehensive. That means at a broad level, you go broad and try to take in everything you can, okay? At the same time, you have to be micro-incisive. That means you have to be able to bring to bear all your knowledge on the thing at hand. So incisive, that means if whenever you're dealing with something, so it's, think of it like a funnel. You're not just going out, you're trying to get everything, and all that you got, you're trying to bring to bear on the point at which you're focused. So micro incisive, micro means at that small point on which you're focused on, whatever it is that you're doing now. It has to be incisive in the sense that all the knowledge that you have gained, you have to be able to transform whatever you're doing better. It has to be a cutting. You have to be able to cut better because of all the things. That's what he means by that. So about curiosity, let me hand it over to Joe. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, curiosity is key to becoming a generalist. I mean, so the idea that you're intellectually curious, that you haven't necessarily even, you're not satisfied with where you are, I don't really see how you can become a generalist without being curious. And he states that that's a reoccurring theme in the book, is the importance of being intellectually curious in your journey to self-discovery. So, and that's where he talks about the idea of, finding your match. Match quality as to for your future careers, that you're identifying, you're getting into as many industries as possible, having as many planned experiments as you possibly can, and as many role models as possible. And only a curious person could possibly have those. So it's an essential quality of having a generalist. One other thing is that it's also is that the comprehensivist is, and I would really appreciate anybody else's input on this. The comprehensivist I look at as more as a system thinking approach, whereas this is, I see it as a more of an individual, which maps into the systems thinking approach. Would you agree with that, Shrikant? Can I ask you?
It's difficult. Can you repeat what you said? Let me just try to make sure I understand what you said.
So basically, I looked at the comprehensivist as Bucky Fuller's approach, as more systems thinking, where this is more of a personal development.
Yeah, I mean, that's the
yeah.
focus. I think that Buckminster Fuller's view is far more broader and far more powerful. It is more philosophical. It gets to the root causes, kind of root things that are involved in making this happen. Whereas this is kind of a much more kind of a lower level. It's kind of reporting on what he has found amongst this. So whereas Buckminster Fuller is a profound philosopher.
Right.
He's actually showing you how everything is put together. So it's at a different level.
It's a different level. Yeah, it's that's where you can get into the metaphysical and the physical.
And I want to address one more thing, Julie. You're talking about these that you're new to the Comprehensivist Wednesdays. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what we are trying to do here. Okay, this is a joint project between the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society and 52 Living Ideas. It started like that, and Joe was instrumental in getting this started because he introduced me to CJ, who is really amazing person. So what we are doing is that we are trying to encourage and get people here. CJ calls it, comprehensivist collaboration of comprehensivist. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do here. Okay, so firstly, we cover a whole range of topics. Now, CJ by himself can cover a range of topics. So he's just sent me his plan for the next year. It's just awesome. Okay, then in addition to that, we have, we are starting a new series with Sanjay on neuroscience. Neuroscience, I mean, that field is growing. Okay, it is experiencing a renaissance. It's really growing. It's a golden age. Every week, every day, something new is happening. And it is important to understand that. It's very difficult because it's very easy to get kind of sidetracked by this study or that study. Sanjay has been looking at it for a long time. So we're going to start off on December 9th with introductory concepts, of key concepts of neuroscience to get you started. But we'll be doing this every month in order to build up that. In addition to that, on Sundays, Angela Cortellessa, she has done research. She has a PhD. She's I think the only one who has done a PhD on polymaths and in the 21st century. And she invites many polymaths and people who have studied polymaths to study that. But broadly, if you look at this entire 52 living ideas, that's what we've been doing. Okay, that's what we do. Every day we take a topic, different topic, and we are always trying to connect between topics. I learned this idea from Mortimer Adler. It's called syntopical. That means no matter what, like if you're looking at this book, you connect it to all other ideas that you know in every field. And that's how you understand what you're looking at better, because it's not your purpose to read a book. Your purpose is to learn a topic, and you bring every idea to bear on that. So that's a method that we use in these meetups. So in that sense, all these meetups are connected to each other. And this Wednesdays are explicitly focused on connecting. So that's why I like this meetup very much, because it is giving tremendous opportunity for everybody to put their thoughts down. Look at what has happened just so far, okay? Vanessa made this beautiful point about the body and how the variation, and this is a very deep point about the body, okay, about biology itself. You need a variety of exercises, you need a variety of food, you need a variety of movement in order to keep body active. So it is for the mind, so it is for an individual. So that point, Sally made a beautiful point about teams, that you don't have to know everything. It's the fact that we are social beings, and all of this happens in a distributed way, and we can gain and trade with each other in order to fill in where we are weak, and maybe learn a little bit from people who are stronger, and offer where we are stronger, and all of it together works better. So these are all very deep points. Sanjay made point about the combination of generalist and specialist. So that's what we do. We have all these people who are thinking along at the same level, and we are putting our thoughts on the table, and we are trying to have a conversation. So that's what we do in the Comprehensivist Wednesdays. Sorry about the lengthy answer, but I think it is important to know what we are doing and to set the principles down. Next up is Kevin, Donna, Mike, and Miguel. Kevin.
Thank you, Frank. I use some keywords to describe generalist and specialist. From personal level, generalists focus on a variety, broad, and out-of-box thinking or outside thinking. Another side is specialist, more deeper and inside thinking, and narrow and limited deeper. Then here, if we form team, let's say we want to form a team, you need a mix. For example, you need project management, possibly need more generalists. But you need whoever do the job for production, you need more focus on a specialist. This come to my question is for the book. I'm not sure the book mentioned, which Shanka you mentioned, general principle. It apply both to generalist and the specialist. It should be the system thinking for all. That's something obviously we need deep down, use the same principle, apply for everything for learning. Is the book mentioned this area? Thank you.
Joe, would you like to respond to that?
Could you actually clarify, so that your question is basically the idea of a specialist and a generalist should be approaching the systems thinking approach the same way?
Yeah, and this should be some general principle. Doesn't matter it's which let's say I'm a generalist, identify myself, or I'm a specialist, I still need general skills. As generalist, you need something you interest your favorite or your professional going deeper.
So the distinction would be is that this is about the idea of unlocking human potential. So he's saying that the generalist can have a way of doing things that is a little bit more efficient than a specialist, or thinking about things a little bit more efficiently than a specialist. But you're right in the sense that a specialist and a generalist ought to be thinking about the system as a whole, so that it's not necessarily whether you're one or the other. It's just that you're more likely to see the whole big picture if you start to incorporate as many experiences as possible. And he proves that throughout the book, especially when it comes to prediction markets, and various outside or just advantages with making recommendations on even different parts of basically problem solving for companies. So yeah, you're right in the sense that you're right that both the specialist and the generalist should be thinking more on a system-wide basis. Absolutely.
Thank you. I just want to say one thing. I forgot to mention Barry. I mean, Barry's observation that human beings need this, I think it's a very fundamental observation, and it's a very deep observation. So thank you, Barry, for that. Next up is Donna, Mike, and Miguel. Donna?
So I agree with a lot of what folks have been saying, Sanjay and Joe. I think that the ideal specialist, to me, I think of them as the T-shaped, which is they're very deep in one topic and then very broad in a number of topics. I think that just makes them a stronger specialist. And then I would say for the generalist, I think of them as M-shaped, where they're very broad, but at the same time very deep in multiple areas. So they both go broad and deep. And one area where I see danger of specialization is in the medical community. Mm-hmm. You have the cardiologist and the kidney doctor, and someone who has multiple comorbid problems that they are seeing specialists individually, and sometimes the person isn't being treated as the whole person, and that becomes a huge risk. So that's an area where specialists, I think it's very dangerous. So the second piece of specialists and generalists is communication. So if you have the specialists, they definitely need to communicate, and they need to have that generalism in order to communicate with all of the others. So again, I just reiterate the point that it's good to go both broad and deep, depending on what your preference is, whether you're a specialist or a generalist.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of things to unpack there. Actually, getting back to your medical example, one of our previous meetups, and he does talk about the medical field in general and how specialists are, how generalists have a better way of being better being able to diagnose a person's illnesses much more efficiently. But the idea we even talked about during a previous meetup was, and I'm forgetting his name, Shrikant, you led the discussion on Akrov, the systems thinker, that when he talked about the idea of the medical field of how we don't, what's that? Akrov, yes, thank you. About how he would look at how we look at the whole. And if you look at the goal of the medical field, it doesn't necessarily look at the idea of, how you're treating somebody as their entire medical, how am I saying this? Basically treating the whole person versus actually treating the disease. So that's essentially where he looks at, he looks at it as, you're not solving the whole problem. And that's where a generalist would actually look from a medical perspective, makes a little bit more sense. As far as going broadly and then deeply, I have mixed emotions, mixed feelings about that, because I do see the advantage of people that are able to go deep. And I do see the advantage of just being broad. And I think that there is, if you're ideally, you would like to be able to do both. And you are able to do both as a generalist because you're able to apply general principles to a specific problem that will allow you to dig deeper. But I don't necessarily think that when I think of a specialist, I really do think of somebody that is very, very focused and that is in a particular area. And it doesn't necessarily mean you can go as deep as a specialist would. It's a balance. I really do think that there's a balance there. The key for a generalist is that they can use general principles that allow them to dig deep and find answers, but not to the degree that a specialist would. They wouldn't be able to do the things a specialist would.
Thank you. Next up is Mike.
The statement has already been made that you have to kind of be both. Several people, including, everybody has said you have to be both. And the question becomes as to what degree you need to be both. And you need to be effective in solving whatever problem that life or your career has presented to you. And that means that depends on what tools you have available to you and knowing how to use those tools. If you can generalize this or define it mathematically, you can get to a high degree of specialization very quickly and completely define the problem, or at least a model of the problem. Now, the adequacy of that problem is sufficient, is the driver. And there's a concept of bandwidth that goes in, that you could be if you're a specialist, the amount of your ability to reach into other disciplines or to generalize needs to be enough that you can gather all the resources to solve that problem. And so everybody is a generalist and everybody is a specialist. In what's going on in this vaccination program, we have 3 of the companies are using specialists in messenger RNA. Now, there's a difference between the specialists and messenger RNA. One of the companies, for example, is using a virus that is a harmless virus to vector the messenger RNA into the subject's body as a vaccine.
Mike, could you wrap it up in about 30 seconds?
I wrap it up in one more sentence. The other specialist is trying to encapsulate, a specialist in messenger RNA, which to an outsider sounds like a very generalist thing, a very specialized thing, but he's encapsulating that in a particular kind of lipid to stabilize it that is digested by the host. So you need to have bandwidth as being a specialist and a generalist that's adequate to the problem that you're trying to solve.
Mike, that was a lot more than one sentence, but it's a very interesting point. The point about bandwidth, of saying, okay, is there an equation, or is it, how do you think of it in terms of kind of, maximizing the depth and this one, and what kind of, how do you think about it in a quantitative way? But that's a very interesting question. Thank you, Mike. Next up is Miguel, Paul, and Ash. Miguel.
Yes, so I haven't read this book yet, so I wanted to propose this topical question about this topic. And if the people that have read the book, or you can help me fill in this confusion from the standpoint of approaches to information, depth, and understanding. We have the comprehensivists, we have the systems thinkers, we have the generalists, and we have the polymaths. So what are the commonalities and what are the differences? And please illustrate some examples that represent each. Thank you.
All right, that was a brilliant question. Okay, that's a brilliant question. So comprehensivist, generalist, polymaths, and what was the last one you said?
Systems, I believe.
Systems.
Was the
Systems
systems,
thinkers,
yeah.
Systems thinkers. Now I don't know what each of these things, it's like the way I think about it, I can just tell you how I think about it. Okay. I think that you have to be open to all the world, and you have to abstract general principles from it, and everything works in systems. So you have to figure out how the systems are working and what are the general principles involved in that in order to do anything. That's how I approach it. So that's why, I'm very curious about things. What I'm trying to put it in form of principles. I'm trying to relate it to each other. I'm trying to say, okay, what is the systems? How is actually the energy flowing in all of this? So systems is a core part of how I think about it. General principles is a core part. Now I'm going to try to describe these things, but these are not the terms that I commonly use. So comprehensivist is focusing on being comprehensive. The generalist is saying, okay, I'm not going to restrict myself to specialists. So it's kind of defined as opposed to specialist. A polymath is like different, different disciplines. Systems thinker. So in many senses, many of these terms are reaction to what has happened in industrial revolution of division of labor. They are all kind of they are kind of reaction to that. So it's like, that's why I don't like many of these terms, because I'm just saying, okay, what should a human being be? So this is a more kind of philosophical way of looking at it. And when you come to that, I don't need to think in terms of specialist or generalist, because I'm saying that you need to have general principles in order to do anything at all. So in order to be a specialist, and seeking of general principles is good. The more disciplines you see, more chance that you are going to get more general principles. Polymath, again, I don't think in terms of polymath, because I say, I don't regard it as being unusual. I regard that, just you're an individual, you should go in. So that's how I take it. Now, at the same time, I want to make one thing. Many folks have spent a lot of time on each of these terms, and they will defend it. They will give a better take on these terms than I've been able to do. So I respect that, but this is my personal answer to that. Joe.
I mean, I define it similarly. The way I look at it as a comprehensivist and is a comprehensivist is someone who's taking a systems thinking approach to things, and they're looking at the whole system. Now, I agree with Shrikant in the idea that you're looking at general principles in order to get to some value, and that is systems thinking in its utmost to me. is that you start to say, I can build these principles with the idea of achieving, some objective, and I have a framework that I can now apply to the entire system. That's how I look at the comprehensivist. The comprehensivist and the systems thinking are kind of is just the individual that is you're taking the entire system into account. As far as a generalist is concerned, and a polymath, there is in the book, he defines polymath within the context of the company 3M. And a polymath, the way they defined it, is somebody that is somewhat of a generalist, but actually can go very deep in specific areas. But they're a generalist in, say, you would almost be a generalist in the medical field, but you could specialize in one particular area where you have more generalized experiences. But I don't necessarily distinguish between a polymath and a generalist, in my personal opinion. Yeah, I mean, I do think that as far as a comprehensivist or anything that Bucky talks about is, as we had talked about earlier, it's much deeper. It includes how to think about the world, and then you use principles within that in order to analyze the world and analyze your experiences. And that is a much deeper concept than just gaining a number of experiences so that you can start to understand the world. That's actually looking at the world. It's almost a way of solving the problem, as opposed to, in this case, is just about experiencing problems.
Yeah, my approach is very similar. I think the closest one is Buckminster Fuller's approach that I kind of resonate with.
Right.
I don't see this as a problem. I think, Buckminster Fuller talks about it. Acuff talks about it. I see it as, the child is like this. We are born like this. We're curious about the world. We want to do stuff with the world, and that's what we are. For some reason, we lose it. So it's not a very complicated thing that we are trying to put together. It's kind of going back to the root of what we are. So it's like, like Carl Jung's terms in psychology, it's like understanding the self so I don't know, Miguel. So that was a great question, but please, what do you think?
Well, I was going along the same lines that you were saying, that, there is an emphasis or an effort to put those terms within a context of those books. But in the grander scheme of things, I'm just asking because as a group, we're developing a conversation and bringing in all those terms, so we understand the cross definitions of and how it applies. What I get from Joe is that the only slight difference is that the comprehensivist goes deeper. In the sense of not stopping at a specialty, but going to metaphysical and interplanetary level. So it's a higher elevation than some of the other topics. But otherwise, we're just looking for depth in whatever endeavor and trying to have a systemic approach when looking at those depths.
Wonderful. Thank you, Miguel. Next up is Paul.
Yeah, thanks. I'm very curious about something, so I'm going to tell a very quick story or two and then ask this question related to it. I want to use the example of my daughter, who was majored in fine art oil painting, okay? And that sounds pretty specific already, right? But they said you can't just say oil painting. They forced them to draw the human figure for a whole year. She wasn't necessarily trying to draw the human figure, but my point is, in that educational program, they decided what a person needed to try out in order to call themselves the bigger domain of oil painting. Then she went on to RISD, and then she was talking about being a director. Well, to be a director, the guys who are directors say you should spend some time as a prop person, you should spend some time as an art person, you should spend some time choosing the music, you should try to do every job that the director is directing. And so my point is, now I'm going to give you one more example, the liberal arts education. They claim to have solved this problem a long time ago, way after the Industrial Revolution, saying you should get this well-rounded education with some science and some history and some. So what is your thought and the author's thought about the educational curriculum that flows from the ideas?
Well, I mean, one of the idea, one of the chapter, I believe it's chapter 4, goes into the idea of teaching procedures versus teaching concepts. And this is a very important thing when you're talking about a liberal arts education versus what we've now, you're talking about even traditional education. In traditional education and the way we're teaching it, especially at university levels, we're teaching procedural type of things where we understand, we do this, we get an answer, and we don't necessarily question that answer. And that's where you have highly specialized majors that don't necessarily ask some of these broader questions. And so the conceptual aspect of it, by teaching concepts, and it is a much more effective way for learning and understanding. That is, he talks about in the book, is the importance of it, and he talks about various countries and studies that have been performed throughout the world, where conceptual thinking is progress. And I think while the liberal arts education in and of itself hasn't, he doesn't go into great detail about that, but you're right. The liberal arts gives us a lot of broad perspectives that we need in order to solve for problem solving after school.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. And this is a topic that we'll keep coming back to on kind of education. It's a core topic, and it's of perennial interest. We've done many meetups on that, and we'll keep on doing more, but specifically from this angle. Next up is Ash.
Thank you. So I don't really have a specific question, I guess, so much as a couple of general observations in the spirit of the, what's it called, the Comprehensivist Wednesdays. So yeah, just maybe get your thoughts on them. But so you mentioned a few minutes ago, Shrikant, about sort of the division of labor. And it's kind of interesting because in a sense, the specialization is sort of as specialization and exchange as laid out by Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations is sort of the almost the foundation of our modern capitalist society, economy. So I'm kind of curious, I guess a question about like how this fits into that picture. And then my other just observation, I guess, is, so I actually am working on a book on evolutionary theory. So I kind of see everything through the filter of that and always find analogies to that with everything else that I'm learning about. And this book is kind of a perfect example of that, because the way I look at evolution is that, in response to any given situation, evolution can go in one of two directions. And one is greater specialization. In other words, being more adapted to a specific situation. And the other one is, greater generalization, or becoming more adaptable to a broader range of situations. And it seems like in the short range, the specialization route has the bigger payoffs, as it enables the capture or creation of more value. But in the long range, the generalization approach tends to win out. And so that's kind of, exactly what he talks about with how people who specialize early tend to maybe outperform their peers up to a certain point, but then they plateau early. and fall off. So I don't know if you guys have any comments on that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, yeah. So yeah, as you'd mentioned, he showed the graph. I'm assuming you saw the graph where he showed where generalists over time more than make up for the income gap that is the difference between a specialist and a generalist. But you bring up a very important point, because there's a discussion that's ongoing now, is that in economics, that where does a generalist fall into the idea of a specialized economy, or a knowledge-based economy, versus the specialist? And is there a role for the specialist in the knowledge-based economy? I mean, as we continue to move post-industrial, and automation does have a way of catching up to parts of individuals that are specializing, there's an incentive to become a generalist, because a generalist can reinvent themselves much faster than a specialist. So you have generalized concepts that you've learned that you can now apply to a different domain. And that if you're only specializing within a specific domain, and you're doing a repeated type of position, a process, any kind of position that is rules based, that they can be potentially automated. And so this is actually, as a generalist going forward, evolutionary wise, makes a lot more sense. And it's even evolving with the new way the knowledge-based economy. So I think that's an interesting concept, because I don't know where the inflection point is now with this, because I think we are going to move away from specialization as being a ideal path, whereas again, I think more conceptual type of thinking, systems type thinking, or even liberal arts education will be an ideal.
Ash, excellent points, both of them. So firstly, on division of labor, I think division of labor is made possible by integration of labor. Somebody has to put together all the division of labor. It's the CEOs, people who organize, organize the economic system, who makes possible, and who have to understand each of those things enough to be able to do that. So the person who actually thinks very well on this point is John Baptist Say, who talks a lot about integration of labor. So that's where I would look if you want to look at economics of this. Regarding evolution, if you look at in the evolutionary scale, man is a generalist. Like, for example, a snake is born carbon copy of its parents, and it's able to actually do something immediately. It's able to eat just like its parents, just smaller, and it's effective, whereas we are completely ineffective when we are born. And it takes a long time. We have a long childhood, and the entire story of primate evolution is longer and longer childhood and longer ramp up to getting, but that ramp up happens in contact with nature, with reality, with others, and learning from learning from others, that allow us to develop our capacity, which is far more flexible, far more adaptive to the environment. Whereas, if a snake is not, it's perfectly suited to that situation. But if it doesn't happen to be that situation, there isn't much they can do. But that's what, so I think, and it is an investment. Just like in a biological, at the evolutionary level, it's an investment to have a child, and it is an investment to have that brain half formed when you're born, completely incapable of supporting itself. But it is the glory of the child that makes possible what a human being is. And this is very much a story, the evolution is very much a story of, not evolution as such, but human evolution is very much a story of moving towards having this general capacity, which is simply learning. That really, it's not that it's simply learning, learning new things from reality and from experience. So, but Ash, excellent question. All right, folks. So what we are going to do now is we are going to continue this conversation in breakout rooms. And Joe, you had 2 questions. So you want to read out the question, or shall I?
Yes. Given the book's distinction between generalists and specialists, how should we think about the strengths and weaknesses of generalists and specialists? And then how can a generalist better ensure their progress through life? I think that's a really interesting question, because generalists could have a potential of drifting. So.
Okay, folks. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to start the breakout rooms now, and they will run for 20 minutes, and then we will automatically come back into this. Give me just a second. All right, count down 120 seconds. All right, I think we're all set. All right, so I'm starting the breakout rooms now. When we come back, we're going to have a very deep discussion. Okay, you would have had chance to talk to several people about these ideas. Again, one rule in the breakout rooms: please allow everybody to put their thoughts on the table. Give 2 minutes to everybody to put their thoughts on the table, whoever wants to speak. That's the primary value of this forum, that you actually get to hear other people. So don't focus on listening to the other people, and speak your mind for 2 minutes, and then you can have a discussion. When we come back, we're going to do 2 things. You have to talk about your takeaways, number 1, and number 2, you can put 1 question on the table. Okay, and I'm going to compile all of that, okay, and see what everybody's thinking, and I'm going to look at the patterns in that, and we're going to shape what we're going to do next based on that. Okay, so it's very important that you very crisply state your takeaways, and if you can, put a question on the table which you think is the most important question to be thought about. All right, starting the breakout rooms now. Joe, fantastic job. Okay, this was just great.
You. Thank you.
Coming in. All right, welcome back, folks. All right, it's time for takeaways. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try something. Joe, I'm going to try something really, really ambitious. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hear everybody's takeaways, everybody's questions, and I'm going to try to summarize them, maybe 3 at a time, so we keep track of it. Normally I put them together, but I do that in an impressionistic way. I want to do it more systematically this time. Okay, so and I have help. I have some very high-tech stuff. That was just. Give me a second. There's some couple people who are unmuted. Okay, I've got some high-tech help, which was just invented about 5,000 years ago. I have pen and paper, and I'm going to keep track of everything that is being said, and I'm going to try to organize it, and then we will see patterns in what is being said, and then we will focus on themes, which most people keep coming back to. Okay, so that's what, and I invite you to do the same thing. Okay, that's the best way. The more active you are, the more you get out of it. So don't just listen, actually try to summarize it in your own way, write it down in your own way. All right, so I'm going to call on people. So I'm going to start with Jeff, Andrew, and David Roller. Those 3 will be first, and then I will go to the next one. And what I will do is that, after 3 people have said something, and please help me by being crisp. Try to, give your takeaways in a crisp way. If you have a question, this is the most important, just 1 question, you can put it down. All right, so with that, Jeff, Andrew, and David. Jeff, take it away.
So it does seem to me that there's some balance between specialist and generalist that is true in almost everything. And it also seems to me that there are different kinds of genius, if you will, that lend towards a person really being able to become a phenomenal expert on things that we really want them to be phenomenal experts on. And then other kinds of genius that really lend themselves to knitting or, seeing the relationships and the connections between many different things. And I wonder what those types of genius might be in each of us, and that what might be stronger or not as strong, to each of us individually.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. So it's going to be now Andrew, David Roller, and Barry. Andrew.
All right, thanks. My takeaway, well, my maybe observation was that there's maybe a terminology issue here. And generalist it sounds like really what we're talking about is openness. And so I would argue that that's really important to make that distinction, because you can be a specialist, but be open-minded. And so in a way you can, depending upon how you want to define these terms, really, they're not separate, right? You can be specialized and open.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Next up is David, Barry, and Jean. David.
So I guess my observation or something that struck me is some other readings I've been doing is this discussion follows along the lines of artificial intelligence development. And so the current progress is being made in narrow artificial intelligence, narrowly focused, but the desire, the goal is to strive towards the general artificial intelligence, and then eventually, to the super artificial intelligence. But I found it very interesting, the discussions that we've had going on here is it almost is matching something that I've been reading is in the direction that artificial intelligence is being migrated, and maybe that work is being patterned off of our behavioral dynamics.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Thanks, David. Next up is going to be Barry, Jean, and Tova. Barry?
Yes. Well, my observation is, and I talked about this, is the Peter Principle can be applied to the workforce, but also can be applied to your life. And the Peter Principle is that you advance people to their level of incompetence. So you always pick a manager that was really good in their specialty, but when they become a manager, they're lousy. Well, that was my experience in life. I was good as an engineer, but when I lost my wife, I wasn't ready to handle the emotional impact to it. But when I started exploring yoga and art and poetry and psychology and neurobiology and all these other things, I was able to advance and grow. So it's all about, do you want to be stuck in grief, or do you want to be growing to be better at whatever life brings your way?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Barry. Next up is Jean, Tova, and Paul. Jean?
Yeah, I think the generalist and specialist, we all have some of that. It's more like what's your more towards. You're more specialist or you're more generalist. We have both qualities. And my experience early in my career, I think to be a good employee, you have to be more specialist, because the manager or the boss, usually the journalist, they're looking for specialists to work for certain function for their company. But as you move up, you actually need to be more generalist to be able to take higher position, so it's kind of conflict. The good employee may not be a good manager, but the good manager materials could be a lousy employee at the beginning. It's kind of funny.
Excellent observation. Great observation, Jean. Next up is Tova, Paul, and Ash. Tova?
I guess my takeaway is just like the significance of what type of learning environment lends itself to what type of specialist you are. And just wondering, like on like a sociological level, like what and how and in what ways like our industries will be changing with like advances in technology, advances in AI, for the ways in which we learn as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is Paul, Ash, and Linda. Paul?
Yeah, my main like open point relates to this thought that there, in any place you want to speak with credibility, there's expectations about how much depth you need to speak with credibility. So it's not our choice. If we choose a domain we want to speak with credibility in, we're forced some degree of specialization and some degree of breadth, and it's determined by expectations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next up is going to be Ash, Linda, and Sally. Ash?
Yeah, one of the kind of recurring themes that keeps coming up in the discussion is the necessity of being kind of both a specialist and a generalist in different respects or at different times, or I'm not sure exactly what the relationship there is, but it kind of seems like they're almost flip sides of a coin, or maybe even better to describe it as that they form a sort of spectrum. So, and Joe kind of mentioned the need to balance them. So I guess the way I would maybe think of it is you want to sort of broaden your range along that spectrum so that you can operate in both sort of generalist mode and specialist mode as needed. So I guess that would be my main takeaway.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is Linda Yo, then Linda Mons, and then Sally. Linda.
I'm sorry, I'm a terrible listener, so I just agree with myself and give my example. I have a brother who is not good at math and other general education at school. And it was really, when we were little, it's very hard to teach him anything. But he was very good with his hand. As he grown up, he became a mechanic and he makes a lot of money with that job. And he loved that job. He cannot do other things. I have to help him in other way, but he is very good with this job. I myself is a generalist. My bachelor degree was in accounting, and then I take a master degree in nutrition, and I like to study all other things. And I make my money here and there from the things that I know. So I think it's okay either way. Sometimes people judge themselves too harshly. Like I judged my brother when he was little, like, oh my goodness, you cannot be anything, you know, you cannot study. But yeah, forgive yourself and then, you know, learn about your kids also. If you have kids, you know, try to find out their talent and direct them. They can be generalists, they can be specialists. Either way, they should be fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Now it's Linda Mons, followed by Sally and Miguel.
My conclusion would be, in the best of all possible worlds, people should be given the opportunity to be specialists, and then if their life allows it, branch out to be generalists.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. Okay, next one is Sally. Sally, go ahead.
Okay, my takeaway is just the reminder, I think Shrikant, you may have said it, or Joe, that just to look at where I am and to try to improve upon my level of knowledge in whatever category I'm trying to improve, as opposed to, you know, a specialist my age in the same, you know, specialist my age in the same, you know, workplace endeavor or whatever. And so my question is basically the second question for the breakout room is, how does one know when they're becoming a drifter and to, you know, either go deeper or move on to another topic?
Got it. Excellent. Thank you, Sally. Next up is Miguel, Anaki, and Evanek. Miguel.
Going back to what Sally was just saying, it's important to keep track of relative progress because in a globalized world, it's hard to really assess the levels accurately. So keep track of our personal progress. And secondly, I think that the weakness of the drift is important. There is chasing too many rabbit holes or too many subjects. Not only is it time consuming, but it lends itself to lack of action. So I would follow up with when taking on whichever path of learning is, connect that path with concrete and tangible action. That way we don't just diverge. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Next up is Anaki, Evanik, and Brian. Anaki?
I really like, an argument somebody was making in my group that do we actually live in a world where specialists are dominating and we need more generalists? Because we feel like what, the world we're living in is a world where there's so much information and people are actually, they kind of like dabble in different areas and different fields. And we actually like people with depth, with actual depth of the subject that they're interested in. So that's something that I find pretty interesting. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Anaki. Next up is Evanik, Brian, and Sanjay. Evanik?
Yeah, so my takeaway is just being openness. Openness.
Mm-hmm.
I think with a specialist, being a specialist is great, but you should be open to learning more generally about stuff or exposing yourself to things. Like if you are a scientist, maybe go to the theater, or just something like exposure to different things and finding different ways to find joy. I think if you're a generalist, it's the key is being open to being more focused in a particular area until you learn what you need to learn, and then moving on to another area, not just jumping around. That way you can still be a generalist and still have some depth of knowledge. That's my takeaway.
Thank you. Now, so far 14 people have given their takeaways, so I'll try to summarize all of it. This is very difficult, so I'm going to try. Okay. So this is summary of the first 14 people. Again, this is the summary, so we always focus on what people said. This is just my quick summary of trying to put it together. So Jeff and Linda talked about looking at types of geniuses. What are the strengths where people are able to just do amazing things? And that's different from person to person. Andrew and Evanik talked about the importance of openness. David talked about the analog between what we are talking about, specialists and generalists, and what is going on in AI, special purpose AI versus general purpose neural nets or kind of AI. Then Barry talked about, kind of moving from being stuck in a rut, in some place, versus whether it is, part of life, part of business, to kind of having the growth mentality and going out there. Jean made a very interesting observation about that, when you're starting out, you're kind of specialist, but as you move up the organization, when you're trying to kind of integrate works of many people, you need to kind of become more generalist. Towa talked about the learning environments and how the world is changing and what is it that the world requires of us and where we can make most of it. Paul talks about the expectations of credibility that people have when you're doing something. Ash talks about, learning to operate with both generalist and specialist mode need for doing that. Linda argued for, specialist first and then trying to become a generalist when you can. Sally and Miguel talked about, the problem with drifting if you don't watch out, that you're just moving without just not kind of coalescing anything and taking anything with you. And Anaki was talking that the world has a lot of specialists, so maybe having a few more generalists would cause better things. So that's a quick summary of so far. So let's continue. It's going to be Brian, Sanjay, and Joel. Brian.
Okay. I think my first comment would be what I've heard in the breakout, or what I'm hearing here, is there's a lot of confusion over what we're talking about here, which I would subscribe to. I have a lot of confusion also. I generally tend to think people develop as generalists and go to a specialist later on. But I've also heard good arguments that should be the other way around.
Okay. Confusion regarding the order. Okay. Very good. Next up is Sanjay. Sanjay, Joel, and Kevin.
Okay, thank you. So I was looking at this in a little bit different way, in the sense that I think that the concept of generalist and specialist is actually multi-layered. When we talk about our behavior, our personality, at the simplest level, we are generalists or specialists, and again, that's a spectrum. So we fall somewhere along that line. Some of us are much more specialized and mostly act that way. Others are much more generalized and mostly act that way. Other people are somewhere in the middle. But that, most people are talking about that from the point of view of our field of education, the subject that we studied. But there are actually other knowledge domains of life that the same thing applies under, meaning that we can be a generalist or specialist in other areas. For example, in the discussion, this actually raised this idea in me that, when we're working in a company or for a company, we have our own field of knowledge, the field that we studied, but also the domain of business expertise. And many people who work as a leader or in management have to work in both of those areas. They have to be either a generalist or a specialist in their own field, as well as either a generalist or specialist in the domain of business. And then I expanded that to mean it's not only, it does not apply only to our professional life. It also applies to our personal life, in the sense that in our general life, how we acquire knowledge. So this is really about how the gathering knowledge across multiple domains. That's the idea that I'm trying to express. So for example, in the business world, we have our specialty as well as general business knowledge. And then our personal life, two that I am aware of just right now, is how do we gather knowledge of life in general, right? About the world that we live in, about us as beings, how we integrate into this universe, things like that. And then a second is much more personal, in that how do we work with other people? How emotive are we, our human interactions? And I suspect there are more layers of this, around that. So I'll just stop here.
Excellent. Multiple layers, like individual versus kind of the social interaction. Very good. Okay. Next up is Joel, Kevin, and Deborah Cavisto. Joel.
Thanks, Joe and Shrikant. As always, very informative. But I think for me, the most profound part of this evening was Miguel's quote, and I'll just post it in the chat again. And except to add a little levity, I'll just add one more right. And it's not only a great quote, but it's rhyming. And I don't want to take away anything from what Sanjay just said, because I think it's profound enough to be worthy of much closer study. So I'll just leave it at that, and thank you again for a very entertaining evening.
Thank you, Joel. Next up is Kevin, Deborah Cavisto, and Deborah.
Thank you, Frank. My observation is like a specialist needs open mind to have a general skills. It's help you adapt to new change for your specialty area. A generalist needs some focus on one area. You cannot like butterfly here, there. You never get anything deep. But here, my question is, I'm not sure anybody agree with it. We too specialized as human beings as whole. For example, 200 years ago, we too focused on industrial revolution, civil lots change, we benefit from them. Now we think about the environment. Let's see if back 200 years ago, can we do an industrial revolution? Also think about the environment impact. The world would be different. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Deborah Kivisto, Deborah and Laura.
Okay, I do have to a disclaimer, which is that I had to leave for a couple minutes. So I hope I'm fitting in correctly to wherever we are right now.
So Deborah, what we're doing is we're just recounting very brief takeaways. And
Okay.
if you have any question, we are putting it on the table. Go ahead.
Okay, I was in the breakout group. So I was arguing in the breakout room of a liberal arts education. I know Joe mentioned it. Thank you, Joe. You're so smart. And I just cannot emphasize enough how incredibly useful it is, because it's very comprehensive and it's very useful in today's world. So you study psychology, sociology, criminal justice, argument and reasoning, debate, religion. All of those things allow you to build community and to connect with other people, which is a great foundation for any sort of negotiation in the world or any occupation. And so I was saying, like in Europe, they have this kind of thing, and then you specialize in your master's degree. So if I could be the Secretary of Education, that's what I'd be pushing for, and it would be free.
Thank you. Thank you,
You're
Deborah.
welcome.
Next up is Deborah,
Yes.
Donna, and Christian. Deborah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So to follow up a little bit on what Anaki was saying, we talked a little bit about in our breakout room. I was interested in just this, in range and a couple of other, new books that have come out recently on polymaths. And from what I understand, it's a fairly new literature. Of course, polymaths existed throughout history, but it seems to be a new area of study. And most of them say that we live in an age of specialization, but they give examples of this, but I can think of many counterexamples that we maybe live in an age of generalization because the digital, the knowledge explosion. And so I wonder if this new literature is a reaction to specialization, or it's actually a reflection of the fact that we've already moved away from specialization.
Got it.
I don't know the answer. That's my question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Deborah, what's the state of specialization versus generalization? Laura, you're next.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I could sort of think through generalization, looking through generalized topics. We focus on one, so we get to the point where we actually become specialized in something, but we move back into a generalized state. We haven't really left the generalized, but we've become specialized in a small component of a generalized area. And then the other part is, can we ever become too generalized?
Got it.
Okay, from that, the second question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next up is going to be Christian, Donna, and Vanessa.
So we had an interesting discussion in the breakout room, and I think Sally was bringing up an example of someone who kind of like made their way as a screenwriter and had to continuously kind of push forward and kind of, even though they had no idea what they wanted to do, they just continued to go into different experiences and learn from those experiences, even if it wasn't exactly related to what they wanted to do. And then later on, they became successful. That kind of goes into something that I wanted to ask a question about is how do you prevent drifting when you're not sure of what exactly do you want to do if you're a generalist? That was our second question in the breakout room. We never really got an answer. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Christian. Next up is Donna, Vanessa, and Jairo. Donna?
So a number of people have touched upon this, that generalists and specialists seem too black and white to me. I think the ideal, as I said before, is a specialist that goes broad and the generalist that goes deep. And I see it as a matrix where, you know, it depends on what is needed at the time. When and where do you go broad? When and where do you go deep? When and where do you go broad? And so it's about flexibility. I think that's the key.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Donna. Next up is going to be Vanessa, Jairo, and Julie. Vanessa, what's your takeaway?
Okay, well, I've seen that depending on the desired outcome, Jeff had brought something up like a specialist, like a cardiac surgeon. You want them extremely focused and specialized, or like a neurosurgeon. So you may have an excellent product, and if you're more with the generalists, you may have a more unique product and they may end up being more productive. So you may get something more unique with the generalists, but something superior with the specialists, like I said, the neurosurgeon or something. And little disclaimer for the specialists, would be helpful to be a team player. Can you imagine being in the surgery and just pushing everyone the wrong way? You may not have the best of outcomes.
Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Jairo and Julie.
Well, well, from listening to Jeff and Sanjay and others, I get three different ways of
Jairo, your sound is having a problem. You can type in the chat and I'll read it out. Okay. Next up is Julie.
Oh, what?
Oh, that's better. Go ahead.
Could I say it?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. That was my headphone. So I just came up with this. Tell me what you think about it. There's like three-dimensional or three vectors of spectrum from specialist to generalist. So from vertically, it would be like the classic specialist would be you train in a tech school and you come out and get a job, versus get a master's in something very general or like liberal arts and you end up being in management or something else. And then there's another direction that's more like horizontal, where you hang in that position. It could be as a specialist in a particular career at the bottom, or it could be at the top, but you're in the company for so long that you become so specialized or world-renowned that you're considered a specialist, versus somebody that gets put in a task to learn real quick and figure things out real quick and then goes to something else. And then there's another direction, could be sort of like a person like Steve Jobs that's so specialized and then generalized at the same time, because he's so creative and just has to know a little bit of everything, but he's really focused and specialized.
Thank you, Jairo. Next up is let me see, Julie.
Okay. I think there's so many examples of things that don't work in this chaotic world that it's hard to find the truth. And I've spent a lot of my time as a drifter, kind of just floating along, hoping to find some, and haven't been proactive about it until now. And I've come so long just in 3 weeks on these calls as far as finding my position. And I have also observed, I like to see things that work, and then I take them, look for patterns, and I test them with another situation, because I do believe they're universal laws, that a person can be very good in his own little world and go out there and be very skilled in a different thing because of those kind of lessons about truth.
Okay.
So I think that Socrates is right about getting to know yourself. I really have witnessed what happens to someone when they're doing their passion. We all have gifts. I'm trying to go deep with myself and let curiosity guide me as far as finding out what my strengths are. And I think that if everybody was doing that, I think polymaths are simply people that totally follow their curiosity. They never bought into any of the limitation lies. And, you know, who knows? I think if everyone just followed that, would be very powerful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. All right, let me go ahead and now try to put things together. There is, so one kind of the basic thing that came out here is, what is the ideal? You know, what is the ideal? What's the best way to function? You know, we talked about, like Ash talked about it. You know, Jeff talked about it. So several people have talked about it. But, you know, what is the ideal way? Instead of saying, okay, am I more of a generalist, more of a, what is the ideal way? You know, what is your answer to that? You know, it's like, for you, forget about now talking about society, okay? Just look at it for you. On this issue of generalist versus specialist, what do you think is the ideal? I mean, for me, the ideal is to be open to the world at all times, especially when the world and experience is telling you that you're wrong. So being open, being curious. Secondly, relentlessly trying to systematize things, trying to come up with general principles, and then trying to apply it in action to everything, and very closely watching what the results are and getting feedback, especially if you're wrong. So that cycle, so so there are two ways in which I'm a generalist, that I'm open to many things. And second is I'm always looking for general principles. In the sense I'm a specialist is that I'm always trying to apply it to something or the other. I'm saying I'm doing this and I'm trying to put everything I have in that. So that is how I, you know, that's my ideal, my conception of ideal. So what is your conception of ideal? If you want to speak, just go ahead and type an exclamation mark. And just, I would like to know what your ideal is on this front. I mean, I would add to, if I wanted to incorporate Jeff's point and point of Linda, is that you have to be cognizant about what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. That's very important, especially your weaknesses and also your strengths. And you have to be willing to work with people where you are weak and be committed to doing that. Because I think that's the shortest way of actually delivering a lot of value to the world and also learning in the process. So that's how I would talk about the team part, communication part, the giftedness part. So that's my take. So folks, now go ahead. You have a little bit more leeway. You have maybe up to 2 minutes now to speak about what do you think your personal idea. Don't talk about how it should be for anybody else, what the world should be like, just for you. What is your ideal on this? So it's going to be Joe, Kevin, Sanjay, Vanessa, Barry, and Deborah. Joe, go ahead.
I mean, for me, I look at being a generalist as the way, that's my personal journey, because I think in terms of concepts, and I really, procedurally learning isn't something that really interests me. What interests me are whole systems, and where I can apply, principles, as we've talked about here at 52 Living Ideas, to problems as a way of discovery keeps things interesting. And I think that for me, I've always been intellectually kind of curious. So that being said, I also have and I said this in the breakout room, is a high degree of admiration for somebody that is able to find what they like at a very early point in their lives and follow that path and make that path work for them. So for me, it's a generalist. I mean, and taking this principled approach towards problem solving. However, I have great admiration for those who do choose and follow the specialist path.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Kevin, Sanjay, Vanessa, Barry, Deborah, Jairo, and Evanik. So folks, the question on the table is, what is your ideal? What is your personal ideal in this? Kevin.
Thank you. For me, ideal is always, let's say, come to your 52 idea, empty myself, in mind, everything. It's a big bucket, try to learn something. Learn general to be the specialist. Even I never to be specialist in anything. It's just learning and enhance myself. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Sanjay.
Yes, thank you. So for me, the approach I take is basically, or at least early on, was learning by observing, looking for patterns and things in the world. And for example, when we're young, we do this. We don't know a lot, so we're basically observing and watching our teachers and others, parents around us. And also when we get older and we start our first job, let's say at an early level, we're an entry-level employee. Similarly, in that environment, we would learn by observing. We would not know the company. We would not know how work is done. So it would be, in one sense, we would be doing things that we're trained to through our education, but also we would be learning, so to speak, on the job. So learning by observing is a very important part of how we learn. And I think we need to extend this throughout life. Second, I think there were two, Evanik and Deborah, they both commented on this, and maybe other people also, but I agree with the notion of having a broad education. They both talked specifically about liberal arts, but I think it's more than that. I think that every person needs to have as broad an education as we can. The problem is it's expensive and it takes time, and not everybody can do that. But I would say, I mean, I did this in my education. I'm trying to get my children to do this also. And so obviously we have to have not just an arts education and a science education, but I would say not even make distinctions between the two. Try to integrate the two in every course that you take. And I actually saw that this can be possible when my children were in high school. And I saw that their high school did something very experimental where they tried to do exactly that. They tried to coalesce multiple fields, and they built their entire curricula around that. It was very innovative. And I think it can be done, though universities don't typically do that. We have to do it on our own. So yeah, integrating, looking at the world in as full and cohesive a way as we can, that will help us to find all of these threads that tie things together, that they're always there. I mean, I learned early on that helps me to learn. Like, I remember I think I said this earlier a while back, that history was a difficult subject for me to learn. But after I learned that the world was a full world, 300 years ago, that people were living not just, in terms of the dates and the times and the names of people, but the world was just as complex as it is today, 300 years ago or 5,000 years ago. And once I started realizing that, once I started learning about the different aspects of life, 300 years ago, and integrating all those together, it became a much more interesting and easier to learn. So I think doing that throughout life is important.
Thank you, Sanjay. Really appreciate all the observations. You always have very rich, rich base of observations. So just great. Thank you. Next up is Vanessa. Vanessa, what is your ideal?
Okay, I probably tend more towards a generalist, even like growing up with kind of like trial and error. And I've had some of my most beautiful hikes is when I went off the beaten path and stumbled across two fawns looking at me. But I think sometimes to bring balance into it, it may be helpful to refocus, and maybe there's something, even if it's a hobby, that maybe you focus on, be it needlepoint, where you just bring all your focus into it to maybe recenter. And like, just like photography, you can have a great landscape, but then you can zoom in and have this one drop of dew with the light bouncing off of it that's maybe more beautiful than the whole picture of itself. So I think it's more like kind of striking a balance and what brings you maybe joy and stress, or if nothing else, even maybe to calm you down. So like I said, it's finding the balance, and one day we'll figure it out.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Barry.
Yes. I have to quote one of my poems.
Please.
When I live in Oregon country, and probably can't see me. Can you see me now?
I can't see you. We can't see you, but we can hear you very well. Go ahead.
Okay. So I live in Oregon, and vineyards are very common here in Oregon. There's a lot of wine. And so when I my wife was sick and on dialysis, I became very interested, and I take tours of wine vineyards. And one time I took a tour of where they had Pinot grapes, and these Pinot grapes are have very thin skin. They pick up everything that's in their environment. And I said, that's me. So I wrote a poem about it, and it's based on the concept that fermentation is like meditation. I said, vine, take what is not mine, make what is mine divine, so that my meditation time ferments me into fine wine. So my ideal is that when you drink of me, and I drink of myself, that it will be of high character, and it will be something that you will want to swallow and not spit out. And so that's my ideal, to be calm, creative, compassionate, charismatic, confident, and competent, and I call it the 7 C's. And so these are all the things I'm striving for. And I would suggest anybody that is, in my 78 years, if you're concerned about drifting, write down your ideals and check what you're doing and whether they meet your ideals. And if you're meeting your ideals, you're not drifting. And it's disintegrating what society and your parents taught you and doing what gives you flow and harmony with yourself and your environment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barry. You're always an inspiration, and I really like your poems. So thank you. Thank you very much. Next up is Deborah.
Thank you. So my personal ideal is definitely a generalist and theory to have a bird's eye view. I think it's a beautiful ideal. It's what I want. I think it's the limitations of our brains and our lifespan, I think, prevents it on, the sort of search for the unity of knowledge. It's a dream that I always want to strive for, but I think at this point in time, unless we have many people working towards it, it might be, the question is always whether that's a possible dream for one individual. So it is my dream, but I don't know if it's attainable.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I'm a student of history, and when you look at history, the amount of leisure that we have, amount of prosperity that we have, I think the opportunity of actually pursuing what you want is so much easier now. I'm also originally from India, so I've seen what Indian villages are and how much of the effort goes just to feed yourself. So I think we're in a good position. So I think if people want to do it, I think it's relatively easy. At least, that's how I see it. But
yeah, there's an embarrassment of riches, certainly.
Yes. Next up is Jairo. Jairo, what is your ideal?
I like what you said, but yeah, perhaps I've tended to end up being kind of a polymath, or trying to specialize in one area, then I get tired of it and go to something else. So when I go in to specialize it and then come out, then I see principles that maybe I can use to another area that I go into to specialize. As I go in, I don't see anything around because I'm focused. And then when I come out, I start seeing principles like what you say, or some kind of design principles that I can use in another area, like take something out of it and kind of apply it to other areas.
Okay, thank you, Jairo. Next up is Evanik, Ash, and Deborah. Evanik, go ahead.
My ideal is that that I would be a generalist, and in the beginning stages, like I think of it as a cycle. Like in the beginning, I'm looking at many different topics and picking what interests me, and then specializing, learning more, going in depth more about that particular topic. And then once I feel like I've reached a level of attainment of knowledge that I want, then maybe going into another topic that I'm interested in. And focusing, and then doing that cycle again of, general focus.
Excellent. Thank you, Evanik. Ash and the cat.
Hi, this is Liberty.
Hi.
So I agree with a lot of what people have been saying. It's probably no surprise that people doing something called Comprehensiveness Wednesday would tend more towards being the generalist side. And so like Joe was saying, I really, for me, really focusing on general principles. For years, I've been describing myself as somebody who specializes in generalizing. And, it's all about finding those, looking for those connections between different things and forming those broader concepts. And I really liked what Sanjay was saying as well about, kind of tearing down those divisions between, the sciences and humanities and education. And, because sometimes people will say, well, and I agree, you should learn about the humanities as part of a kind of a broad liberal arts education that other people have mentioned. But, I think it's as important for humanities students to learn about science as it is for like science and engineering students to learn about the humanities, to be like a really broad, well-rounded individual. But I really like the way Sanjay put it about, not just that engineering students are taking liberal arts classes and maybe vice versa, but actually, in all of the classes trying to integrate the two. And that's kind of what I try to do in my own approach. And I hope that what Sanjay was suggesting, that our educational system will kind of move more in that direction.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Ash. Next up is going to be Deborah.
Okay, perfect segue, Ash. Thank you for that, because I wanted to just expound a little bit on my comment I made about the liberal arts education again. I'm definitely
Deborah, we're talking about your ideal. Your ideal.
It is my idea. It is my ideal. It's my life.
Yes.
So I was just saying, just to rattle it off really quickly: psychology, sociology, criminal justice, argument and reasoning, interpersonal communication, religion, history, music, art. Those are all things that I got to study as a liberal arts major. But so Ash, this is for you and Sanjay. My math course, and you have to take science and math, obviously it's required, was math for liberal arts majors. How do you like that? So at Cal State Fullerton, they had a program specifically designed to use math in our field of study. So we studied statistics and all kinds of different types of mathematics that bring the real world into the field of math. So I thought that was really, they were ahead of themselves in teaching that. But for me, it's been a good foundation that's very comprehensive. And to tie into something that Joe said, he had talked about being able to reinvent yourself. So I think we as generalists, it's easier for us to reinvent ourselves because we have to pivot and shift, and some jobs are going away. Sometimes we have to invent our own jobs because ours has disappeared. And so I think as a generalist, it's more conducive for you to be able to do that with this sort of a background. And also for me, it's fostered a tremendous love of learning, and it's allowed me to exercise my creativity. And in my opinion, it leads to new paradigms. You know, I'm a paradigm shifter, and also solving problems. So it benefits society. I feel like I can benefit society because of this. Oh, and then another thing that Joe said really quickly, it obviously fosters a human connection, and it involves systems. So all of these courses teach you systems, and then you could see how the systems are analogous to each other. And then it allows you to really understand how systems work. I think I covered like everything in the kitchen sink there in 2 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you. And Deborah has a very nice video at our YouTube channel. I was astonished. I have now 213 videos. And one of them is
Wow.
Deborah's, and she's talking about how to foster love of learning in children. So I recommend it very highly.
Thank you.
So folks, the next question I want to discuss is, so we've talked about our ideal, right? And there are many questions about sequences and the things that you have to watch out for and challenges, okay? So I want to phrase it again at a personal level. So what do you think are your challenges? So you've talked about your ideal, where you want to go, okay? You are where you are now. What is the next step? What are the challenges? So what are the challenges you're facing in getting there to the ideal? And what's the next step for you to move towards it? Okay, because so what are the challenges you face and in your way towards your ideal, and what's the next step? So for me, I am, again, you know, if you want to line up to answer the question, just go ahead and type exclamation mark. So for me, I've always been curious, and I'm always very creative. I'm very enthused about things, and I'm just trying to take in as much as I can and do as much as I can. That's the core of my strength, and that's just there. Okay. Now my weakness is that though I have tried to use general principles, I have not done them as much as I could. I've not tried to crystallize them. I've not tried to, I try, okay? I have these little diagrams that I've used for the last 20 years, which summarize all my ideas, but I think I can do much better than what I've done on kind of formulating the structure of general principles, because I think I have a vision of what can be done there, and actually using them far more rigorously in my thinking from moment to moment than what I'm doing right now. So like my challenge is to master general principles, both organize them and to apply them. And what am I doing? What's the next step? As always, these meetups are integral part of what I do. So I'm doing a whole series of meetups on principles. I'm going in many, many different ways. So I stated my principles, then I'm going to look at principles set by different people. Like I'm going to do principles of Jordan Peterson. I'm going to do principles of different people, and I'm going to try to put it together. So that's what I'm going to do in order to learn how to. I do these meetups only to learn. I don't talk about things I know. I like to talk about things that I'm trying to learn. So that's what my plan is, to fix my weaknesses. So next up is going to be Jeff, Joe, Kevin, and Vanessa. Jeff. What are your challenges of
That's such
as you did not have a chance to talk about your ideals, you can talk about your ideal
no
and then talk about the challenges.
no worries. Thank you. First of all, it's such a great question, and thank you for asking it. It's a really important question for me personally. For several decades, I led an organization where I really could acquire on my team people with expertise in anything and everything I needed. And the role I played was in being somebody who could really look ahead to the future, could apply principles, could relate to everybody, could help to make smart decisions and try things out and learn and generate the resources to do it. I don't run an organization anymore. And what I need to do is, again, play to my strengths and informally assemble that kind of a team for me to be able to depend on and engage and help and support. And I'm doing that a little bit, but to get much more intentional about it is a really important thing for me. So thank you for that question. It helped me to say, you know what, come on, dude, get with the program here. You know what you're good at, and you know, and get yourself in there with other people who can do the things that you know they need to do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful, wonderful question. You know, it kind of builds off of what some of the things actually Barry was talking about, the ideal self, and I appreciated what he had to add as well. I mean, my challenge is, you know, the way I plan on meeting them is to develop role models and to continue. And I think that this forum has actually provided a place for that. You know, I was actually going to say, even before you were talking about the idea of this meetup in particular, is a way of becoming the ideal self. So that's a very important part for me. The other part is that something that Barry had brought up is working on my own personal character in that framework, because that will help me see the best in other people. And it will also help you be able to, you know, do some of the things from a principled perspective that will allow you to extract value from forums like this, but everyday interactions as well. My biggest challenge in this process, without a doubt, is getting to diminishing returns at certain points, and making that distinction was like, when is it, you know, when should I maybe stop on one thing and move to the next? And this, and here again, this meetup has actually helped me with that as well. By having such a variety and such a breadth and depth on so many different topics, that it forces you to you know, have different experiences each night. And the beauty in that is that it's every time you show up, you can leave with something new, and then you can start to put pieces together. And one final thank you is that, you know, goals of like just even presenting in front of people, an opportunity like that is, you know, it's a learning experience for me. And so this is something that I appreciate, and that's part of my challenge, and something that I appreciate dearly. So this meetup is a big part of that.
Thank you very much, Joe. And you're a very big part of this meetup too. So it's wonderful. Thank you. Next up is I'm going to give preference to people who have not spoken before. So it's going to be Julie, Paul, and then Kevin, Vanessa. Julie, go ahead. So Julie, the question is, you've not talked about your ideal. So what is your ideal? And then what are the challenges that you're facing in order to get there? You know, ideal in terms of this generalist versus specialist. What are the challenges that you're faced to get there? And what is the next step that you can do? Okay, so it's going to be Paul next. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I one of the reasons I value this group a lot is the wide range of types of people. Among them are a group of people that spoke, as Jeff spoke of, they've done a lot, they've run something, they've been something, and now they're going, how do I synthesize everything and do the next thing? And I'm another one sort of like that, having had a career in technology and managing large groups of software engineers. And then I got into mental health. So my challenge is I love learning a little too much in a way. So as an example, I love the neuroscience stuff. So I saw I could get this Muse headset that takes my EEG, and then I know how some Python. So I was writing Python code to process the brainwaves and then make music from the brainwaves. But see, I go off on these cool, fun tangents, but my challenge is really synthesizing all my knowledge and experience in a way that really adds value without drifting into a tangent just for the sheer fun of it. That's my challenge.
Wonderful. And what's the next step?
Well, I'm learning from this group, and I think I have sort of a, from the Eastern thoughts and things, method of thinking about this now, where when you're deciding on the next step, you have a lot of stuff already in your head, you already have the answer, you just get really quiet and make decisions from that place instead of getting all hyped up. That's my next step. Learning to just get quiet and feel that guidance, I'd say.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next up is going to be Kevin, Vanessa, Sanjay, and Ash.
I'm so, hey, thank you, Swink. Thank you for the challenging question. For me, the challenge is every time I try to move forward a little bit, I turn down on myself, give a better way to do it or better thinking. And my challenge is I always try to look for some for yourself, you call it general principle or common one that people can easily understand. Can let's one thing for example, math. Every time from our generation, we go to school, learn from teacher, and then now we got a better tool from internet, from YouTube, and from peers. And here's one thing we lacked from unknown to known. We need a bridge of connection between unknown to known. So here we know why one suddenly known. It's something we need to build some tools, not just knowledge itself. If these principles are applied work, for example, let's see in Africa, the education system should be this no education or no teacher. There's no worry about that. There should be like, let's think pandemic ways. Let's see this way. If everybody knows these tools, they can easily deliver knowledge to others. Because it's easy, like just one. Whoa, oh, okay. That's from what I known turn to unknown area, known more. That's so my challenge is find that tools, find a moment tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Vanessa. So Vanessa, what's your challenge and what's your next step?
Well, I think of the saying, curiosity killed the cat. But until that point, that day, a cat always lands on its feet. And sometimes my challenge is if I'm dealing with like a stranger, even something, it's a difficult conversation where I feel like maybe I don't have enough to give to the conversation. So whether it's my generation, I may be less likely to speak up because it's like you don't want to stir the pot and make it a more hostile environment. And sometimes being too empathetic, like I said, finding that little thing where, okay, I need to speak up now, but do it in a respectful way. Because I mean, I think at least in the US, we start talking to each other on some key issues. And if we could just sit back and have like a heart to heart, maybe put the politicians on holiday for the week or whatever, and, let the kids figure it out. Because sometimes the kids are more creative. So it's like finding that balance where, okay, I realize even though, or even being humble, saying I don't have enough to about this, but this is something we have to keep talking about and look into, because this is a problem we need to solve and maybe look a different avenue.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Let's see. Next up is Sanjay. Sanjay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I think, so for me, the challenges are, I mean, the obvious one is time. Another one is my memory, because I find it, I wish I had more memory or better memory. Another is distractions. They're oftentimes distractions in daily life, errands to run, things like that. I have a long backlog of things that I want to catch up and learn about. Finding other people with similar ideas and ways of thinking, although this group is fantastic, and the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, both of these groups have been fantastic. Very happy that I found them. Communicating, this is something that it's a little difficult. I won't go into too much in here, but effective communication with people I find very difficult, in the sense that the ideas we have in our minds sometimes can be quite complex, and the goal of getting that exact same idea into another person's mind is difficult. So that aspect of communication. As far as next steps, the approach that I take, and again, this is next steps, is continuing that, is quietly observing what is happening, what I'm seeing, and then sometimes when I'm observing, I tend to decide too early what I'm observing. So I need to improve on that. That's one of the things that the next steps is to improve on that. Attempting to recreate what I see, what I observed. Exploring broadly, and the internet is a fantastic tool for this, I find, although you have to be selective. Exploring broadly and also exploring in depth.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sanjay. Last is Ash. Ash, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a similar challenge to Paul, I guess, in that my interests have become so broad that I am easily distracted by new ideas, and it can be very hard to focus on actually implementing something. So I guess I take some solace from the book and how he talks about, don't think of yourself as being behind, and sometimes what seems to be inefficiency can actually just be preparation for a greater long-term payoff. But yeah, I definitely need to figure out how to get myself to focus more on a long-term project without getting sidetracked by other things.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I don't want to go for too long. I want to wrap up. But Sally, briefly, go ahead.
Okay. I think I need to be more of a specialist because I think I have these projects that are up and they're begun, but I feel like just like some of the characters in the Paulo Coelho book, I think I'm saying his name wrong. It's like the dream is there, and it's like I'm comfortable in the dream, and I have to get out of that and work on it more. To speak plainly, it's like I have these projects that are begun, and just I'm wrapped up in the what I see of the beauty in them, and I need to just take those little steps, like what is your next step type of thing to continue them.
Got it. Thank you, Sally. So folks, this has been just incredible honor to share these things with all of you. What happens is that each person brings so much to the conversation, and I think we have a format that makes that possible. We also have a culture, an ethos, where that is greatly appreciated. So I think this is wonderful. Joe, I told you this is going to be a fantastic meetup, and I think we did a good job. What do you think?
I appreciate everything and thank you. Yeah, I took away a lot from this meetup, and so thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you, everybody, and have a happy Thanksgiving. Great
you.
Thanksgiving. We'll see you soon. Bye.